When we think of the modern athlete, we think of a highly tuned physical specimen. People who take peculiar care of what they eat, drink, and how they work out to ensure they're at the peak of their physical abilities. But what if some of the greatest performances in sports happened well outside of those conditions? This is what you don't know about inebriated sports. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Matt, and this is Blake.
Hello, everyone.
And today, for absolutely no particular reason on the calendar or otherwise, we've got a topic that doesn't come up very often, and that's the idea of inebriated sports. Blake, what is the extent of your experience, rather, with inebriation and sports?
So, personally, I have essentially no personal experience with inebriation. For anyone who knows, they know what that means.
None of it.
As far as sports, of course, I grew up playing sports and such. Again, very small time stuff, so it's not like anyone was using PEDs or drinking at 16 while we played soccer or whatever. The closest thing I can come up with inebriated sporting would be running. And when I say running, for those who don't know, I was a police officer for quite a while. Of course, people like to run from the cops.
Nah.
If you weren't aware. Okay,
I don't believe it. Yeah,
shocker. People like to run. So oddly enough, they also like to run inebriated. I don't know if they think they're faster. I don't know if they think they're better runners while inebriated. But one poor fellow in particular decided to urinate on some potted plants in the middle of the street, on a crowded street, and snatch his identification from us, and then ran across the street and did the little nana nana boo boo at us and thought we weren't going to do anything about it. So I got sent after him. He crossed the street a couple times, almost got hit by a taxi, and then he tried to turn at one point, and instead of turning, he just kind of cocked his head to the side, like thought he was turning, running straight. He's like, head was going this way, his body was looking like this. And instead of turning, he ran smack into the side of the tallest building in the downtown area in which I was employed. Yeah, so that was probably the funniest thing that I had ever seen in my life. And I wish we had body cameras at the time, because that would have been a hilarious video. At the time, we did not. But he was arrested for multiple things. But that is probably my extent of inebriated sporting.
That is my favorite story. That is one of the 10 tallest buildings in the entire state, and he could not avoid it.
It's glass. So like I equate it to the whole outside of the building is glass. So I equate it to like the old Windex commercial where the birds think that the patio door that's glass is clean enough to where there's not a door there. I like to imagine that he thought he could keep going and ran and smack into the side of this building. It's like 35 stories tall, and he ran into it. He couldn't miss it.
My man.
So if you're listening, you're welcome.
And the building sends its regards for being in the way. Oh, man. All right, so today we've got a couple of stories for you about inebriated sports, and they are in the two bigger stories we have. They're both baseball stories, but they really are historic and significant achievements that were both done in a state that they should not have been able to be done in, you wouldn't think. We're going to start with the infamous Doc Ellis no-hitter. And many of you may be at least a little bit familiar with this story, but it is one of, it's a thing that, like both of our big stories, is conjecture from the person who did it. The suggestion is that some crazy things happened, but there's no way to like corroborate the story to make sure that it's true. But they are both incredible stories to me. So in 1970, Doc Ellis was beginning his third full season as a pro for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He had gone 17-22 in his first two seasons, an ERA of 2.5 his first season, and then 3.58. So not terrible there. His ERA plus, to nerd out for a moment, ERA plus norms it to the rest of the league. So like a 100 is exactly league average. And then it's not exactly this, but whatever you're above or below 100 is the percent above or below, give or take, you are. So his ERA, his rookie year was 116. So that's okay, pretty good. His second year was 98, so below league average, slightly. His WAR, which is wins above replacement, it's another way of ranking players to one another, was 1 and 1.1. So essentially he's a league average player his first 2 years. Nothing wrong with that. We got to have league average players so that we can have good and bad. In the 1970s, it was a common thing for players of all shapes and sizes to take some kind of stimulant regularly, either straight up amphetamines, particularly one called dexamine, which had the colorful name of greenies, or Benzedrine. And Ellis claims that he threw every game of his career on something, whether it was stimulants or he had a drink before the game, or in at least a few cases, something maybe stronger.
Let's think about the time frame that we're talking about here, right? We're talking about 1970, okay? So this was commonplace in this time period. That part, like we think of, we all have inebriated stories. We can admit it, whether they're personal, whether they're third party, whatever. And over time, those things tend to become exaggerated. I think we can all agree to that to some extent. The best ones tend to be exaggerated or could easily become exaggerated. But the fact that he claims to have pitched every game of his career, which is not just 3 years, like he pitched after this point, and pitched every game of his career on something. For this time frame, it's actually not that uncommon. Alcohol in Major League Baseball goes back decades. Like Babe Ruth and probably even before that are notorious drinkers. So that's not anything new. And then this is kind of the time where the stimulants. So if you think of an amphetamine, think of like Adderall, like a performance enhancer, quote unquote, more of a mental thing to help you concentrate. So this is the time frame that this became really popular.
Mm-hmm. And the greenies especially are that kind of pick me up kind of situation. It's an energizer for a sport where you play every day and it's long hours and all that stuff. And it's one of those things that gets brought up in the PED discussion where it's like, well, steroids are the worst thing that's ever happened to baseball. And it's like, yeah, but the guys whose records they were beating were taking stuff too that is now illegal. Like you can't just pick some of those things up and take them for fun. I don't think you could pick them up and take them for fun when they were doing it. But so it's just one of those things. It's one of those criticisms where, sometimes it's just one of my pet peeves. Sometimes baseball in particular is its own worst enemy, where it's like, oh, I can't believe people did this, and you lose perspective. It's just weird. But anyway, so important tip here. Our source for this information on Doc Ellis is Doc Ellis himself, for better or worse. This comes from basically an NPR interview he gave that turned into a viral YouTube video that by all means everyone should go check out when you're done here. The video is by James Blagden, and I think it won some kind of award for how cool it is. But so there you go. Doc Ellis is going to throw a no-hitter, and most no-hitters are a story of a pitcher and catcher in sync, laser focused, hitting all the spots, getting all the breaks, just full of good stuff. This one is not that story. We regularly see no-hitters where someone walks a guy, there's an error, there's something singular that happens. But not this one. There were 8 walks, which is an incredible number.
It's almost 1 per inning.
Period. 8 walks, an additional hit batsman. So 9 guys got on base for free. Of those 9 free passes, 3 of them stole second base. That's another thing that doesn't happen often in no-hitters, is we have runners in scoring position 3 times over the course of the game. And so here's what happened. The Pirates had an off day. They flew in to San Diego, and they had an off day ahead of a series against San Diego. This was back when they played doubleheaders regularly to get travel days built in. And so that off day, San Diego, as we've said before on the podcast, LA is not far from San Diego. I think we said like an hour drive or even less, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that. I don't know, but not far. And Doc Ellis had grown up in LA. So he's in San Diego. He's got an off day. He asks to go home, and the manager was obliged to let him go. So he flies to San Diego, flies to LA, which at first is an odd choice, but we do have people that fly from Raleigh to Charlotte and other nearby places. So whatever. He took an LSD tab, so he dropped some acid, and he says that he timed it so that it would be once he got off the plane and he was riding to his destination, that's when it would hit. Clearly, he's taken enough LSD in his life to know how to time this out. But there you go. So he's going to take an off day, going to hit it, and he says that when he gets, so his destination is a friend's girlfriend's house. That's where he's going. He says that when he gets there, she asks him what is wrong with him because he is just off his rocker. Over the course of this visit, he takes what he believes is just a cat nap. He's laying down. He's for the old folks out there, he's resting his eyes, and everything is going to be okay afterwards. When he wakes up, he still thinks that it was a cat nap. So he actually takes some more LSD because he still thinks it's his day off. When he wakes up from that situation, the friend's girlfriend comes in mildly startled and tries to tell him that he needs to get to San Diego right now. He argues with her for a little bit, and so she comes back in with that day's newspaper and has it open to the sports page, shows him that it's, at this point, I believe it was a Wednesday, shows him that it's that day, shows the article that shows that he is the starting pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates against the Dodgers in San Diego. And so he woke up in a completely different day. So we're getting off on the right foot there already.
So let's talk about the precision with which this acid was taken. He timed it well enough from in the taxi so that when he got to his destination, it hit. Is that correct?
That's his, that was his plan.
Well, as we've stated that drugs were no new thing in this era, I can't imagine that this was his first time doing it, and he knew this will take approximately 27 and a half minutes to feel the way that I would like to feel, and we are approximately 13 miles from my destination. And he did this math in his head and was like, all right, now's the time. Bang, and he hits it. Also, thank goodness for the friend who woke him up, because he's still got to get back to San Diego. He's in a completely different city. He woke up the day that he's supposed to pitch, and he's still in another city. Now has taken acid twice. Ooh, I'm excited.
All right, so thank goodness. Here's another thank goodness. Thank goodness it's the 1970s, because if it's 2021 and you do this, you have to go through hours of security to get on a plane. So he's able, because it's the 70s, to get a cab, go to the airport, get straight on a plane, and he makes it in time to warm up for the 6:05 local start. So he gets there. If anything was planned during the day, if he was supposed to, I mean, it's a starting day, so I guess he probably didn't need to do anything, just in time to warm up. But also in time, he says that there was a specific person that always sat in the front row in San Diego that had the Benzedrine. And so he got some of that. So he's going to take some of that to go along with the residual acid before the game. Here are some things that Ellis claims to have witnessed during the game. At one point, he thought home plate umpire was President Richard Nixon. He thought at one point one of the batters he was facing was Jimi Hendrix, and that Hendrix had brought his guitar to the plate and was using that as a bat.
Also seems fitting.
He said that sometimes the ball looked absolutely gigantic, like he was scared to catch it from the catcher on the return because he thought it was going to be like a bowling ball. And at other times it was in his glove and he would pick it up and it just looked tiny, like a little raisin. We got perception issues. He did say, to the similarities to a normal no-hitter, he did say that he was locked in on the catcher's glove the whole game. He said it was more than he normally was, but he just didn't hit it very often. Couldn't hit it, but he was locked in. And the times where he didn't lock in on the catcher's glove, he was looking straight at the batter for the entirety of the delivery, which would be terrifying to have the pitcher just stare you down.
That would be frightening.
Michael Jordan shooting free throws with his eyes closed is one thing. Like a no-look passing footballs, whatever, but like looking you in the eye to throw a pitch, that not great.
But he ended up hitting someone, to be fair. So let's remember what happened in this 27 innings is he walked 8 people and he hit another one. So
maybe that's the guy he hit. It was the guy who's staring down.
The one time he remembers looking into the eyes of the batter when he delivered the pitch, he actually hit him. So I mean, I've never done acid, in case you were wondering, but I just can't imagine what it would be like to not only do it, but then try to do something as precise as pitch a baseball. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. He did get help from his teammates. You always need, I feel like every no-hitter you see has somebody making some clutch play, that really saved the whole situation. He got highlight reel plays by Bill Mazeroski and Matty Alou from the famous Alou family out in the outfield. And he struck out the final batter on 3 pitches. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, to seal the 174th no-hitter at the time in Major League Baseball history. 174 sounds like a lot, but that dates back to 1876. So at that point, 94 years.
About 2 a season.
Around two a season at most. And like we said up front here, this whole story is up for debate because he didn't tell anybody about it after the fact. The stories are that people assumed something was going on with him because he was just being weird. But he also claims he never pitched a game not on some substance. And we know from some of the goings on in the 70s that some of the other players probably were on something at the time, right? So maybe they just thought nothing was out of the blue. But so he never told anybody until after the fact. Apparently it was written in a biography he was working on with somebody else. He got him to write that part of the story and then took it out before publishing. And then it wasn't until the NPR interview we mentioned earlier that he really brought the story out. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, this makes sense, but also did it really happen? Right? Not entirely sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of time. Again, stories over time tend to get exaggerated, especially something such as this. I mean, yes, throwing a no-hitter in baseball is rare because, like we said, it happens up until that point. It happened about twice a year for the entirety of the Major League Baseball. So it's not like he was just going to fall back into the shadows and just continue to be this average pitcher. Like, he threw a no-hitter. So he wanted to, you would think throwing a no-hitter would have been enough for him to just like remain one of the people who has thrown a no-hitter in Major League Baseball. But then he comes in a decade and a half later saying, "Oh, you'll never guess what happened." And like he tells this story. And of course, 15 years is a long time to make up something. Like, imagine making up a story, coming up with a story from what happened to you 15 years ago and how exaggerated it could possibly be, just because your mind doesn't work as well as most people think it does, remembering that sort of stuff. So it is a cool story. Like, I want it to be true. I'm just questioning the validity and his memory of it, especially if for his entire career, all he did was do drugs. So, like, how much memory do you really have left?
Oh, yeah, that's true. And not to diminish Ellis's career at all. No hitters tend to define pitchers' careers, but he was not a slouch by any stretch. Actually, the next year in 1971, he was the starter for the National League in the All-Star game. And in the 1970s, that would have been an important distinction. He was very outspoken in talking about the way African Americans were treated in baseball at the time. And so he actually started the 1971 All-Star game in the American League. Vita Blue was going to be the starter. And so there was rumors that Ellis would be the National League starter. And so he told the media that he's like, "No, I'm not going to be the starter. There's no way that Major League Baseball is going to let two African-American pitchers start the All-Star game. Not happening." And then they named him the All-Star game anyway. He won the World Series that year with the 1971 Pirates. That's the We Are Family version of the Pirates. So shout out to them. And he was an important pitcher on the 27-time world champion New York Yankees team in 1976 when they won the pennant. The Sporting News actually named him that year the AL Comeback Player of the Year. So he did have some very successful seasons, both individually and team-wise. So, his whole career not defined by this story, but this story is maybe the biggest contribution he had to the baseball story.
Yeah, we said earlier, he had about an average career in his first two seasons. And then this happened. And then we didn't know that this story was a story until the mid-'80s. Minimally. At minimum, we didn't know this story was a story until the mid-'80s. So he went on to start in the All-Star game. He won a World Series. He went to the Yankees, won a pennant, and then won the American League Comeback Player of the Year in 76. Then we find out this thing. So,
by the way, yeah.
Yeah, but by the way, like, after my career's over, I guess I can tell you now that in 1970, so he was an average major league pitcher, maybe a little better. But so he wasn't a scrub. He spent his time in the majors. But if you knew before this story who Doc Ellis was, you knew about it because of this story, not because of his accolades on the field necessarily as a pitcher. It's because he claims to have done this inebriated.
All right. Are you ready for America's favorite segment of this podcast?
I'm
ready? We got a Guess Who. So to remind everybody of the rules, I'm basically going to give Blake a generic area to think about where a person comes from. And he'll be able to ask me 10 questions to narrow down who this person is. And then I'm going to tell you a cool inebriated story, short story about them. So he says he's ready. We'll find out. He's gotten basically everything we've done like this correct, and he always is nervous, just so everybody knows he's going to get it right. I'm almost certain. All right, so this person played basketball.
So we're talking about inebriated sports.
We are. Does that count as one of your questions?
Basketball.
Does that count as one? I don't.
That was not a.
Okay,
that was a statement. We are talking about inebriated sports, and we're talking about basketball. Can I just throw a guess with like an inebriated sports story out without?
Now hold on.
Any questions?
Okay.
Do I get bonus points for
if
just
you get
a
it
wild
without
guess
guessing? But I think the people at home would enjoy the guesses better.
Did he play for the Phoenix Suns?
He did play for the Phoenix Suns.
Was he almost traded to the Los Angeles Lakers?
Oh, see, he was almost traded to the Los Angeles Lakers.
Is his nickname Chuck?
Yes.
Charles Barkley.
Okay, it's Charles Barkley. That was too easy. I shouldn't have picked Charles Barkley for an inebriated Guess Who, but here we are. I did.
I just happened to know when you said basketball. That's the first one with inebriation. But yeah, it's funny.
So Charles Barkley was unhappy in his current situation, and toward the trade deadline one season, his agent had called in the middle of the day to inform him that he was being traded to the Los Angeles Lakers, who in the NBA would not want to play for the Los Angeles Lakers. It'd be like being able to play for the New York Yankees or whoever the big time team is in your particular sport. I would say the NFL one, but I don't want to give those people in Texas that much credit. But not that they would be the first go, but anyway, he was going to get traded to the LA Lakers, and he was going to go celebrate because it's Charles Barkley. So the story is that he went and had a lunch, and he had a couple of drinks at lunch, and then he had a couple more drinks at lunch. He had a good, nice, long lunch. And then toward the end of this long lunch, his agent called him back and informed him that the deal had fallen through, and he would not be getting traded to the Los Angeles Lakers, which really put a damper on the whole situation because he had a game that night. That he played well in. And that's the theme of the episode. But there you go. So Chuck thought he was getting traded to be on a dream team. Actually, had to go play a drunken game of basketball, I guess.
So in an alternate universe, imagine Charles Barkley on the Lakers in the early 90s. Like, what would that have been?
I don't know, though. Would they? So, like, that's the Showtime Lakers, but then would they have gotten Shaq when they got Shaq? So then how does that change the world?
That would have been 90. Wait, I don't know what year Shaq was drafted off the top of my head. Kobe was 90.
So Kobe they got in 96. They got Shaq, I think, in 95, 93. Traded for the so I think he played 2 or 3 years for Orlando, and then they traded him to LA.
Yeah,
and it may have been the same.
Yeah, so
it may have been on
they might not have been in a position to trade for Shaq or to draft Kobe. So imagine what that would have been like.
There you go. All right, here's our second headlining story, and it deals with the only thing that is more rare in sports than a no-hitter, and that's a perfect game. So for our non-baseball folks, you already know the difference, but a no-hitter means you don't give up any hits. Walks, errors, all that's okay. Perfect game, there's 27 men in the box, and all 27 record an out. There have only been 23 in the entire history of Major League Baseball. Sometimes the fate would have it that we get them quickly. Phil Humber, Matt Cain, and Felix Hernandez all threw perfect games in 2012 by some stroke of genius and luck or something. Dallas Braden and Roy Halladay both threw them in 2009. Halladay's being the one that was in the postseason. And sometimes we get them in back-to-back years, like again for the 27-time World Series champion New York Yankees. David Wells and David Cone both threw them in 98 and 99. But usually we get gaps, 3 or 4 years in between them. Sometimes there was one gap, 13 years. Catfish Hunter threw one in 1968. Lynn Barker threw it in 1981. We've actually gone as far as 34 years. 34 years from when Don Larson threw a perfect game in the World Series, again for the Yankees, back to the one that had happened before that. And currently we're on a streak. This will be the entering our 9th season since that 2012 campaign that saw 3 perfect games. We have not seen one since. So very rare, very dramatic. We get near misses every year, but none happen very often. If you witness one, you are one of the few people to have ever lived to watch one through.
You always see, like, if you're watching anything on sports and there's a baseball game going on, and like if there's a perfect game into the 6th, bottom line alert is like breaking news. Roy Halladay throws perfect game through 6 innings, live coverage on ESPN Ocho or whatever. And that happens everywhere. And like, it is a huge deal. And I can't imagine the pressure that those guys feel, because they know what they're doing. Like, they know good and well what they're doing while they're doing it. So I can't imagine the pressure. But I want to backtrack to every time you said that a Yankees pitcher had done such a thing, and all that tells me is that they have too much money.
No.
Like you're just buying players. That's all it is.
They're just the best team on the face of the earth in any sport. So whatever, however that happens, it's still true. Coming in to the 1998 season, I'm going to give you some background on David Wells. He was a pretty good pitcher, all things considered. He had a 122-93 record. That's solid. He had a 25.5 WAR built up over his 12 seasons. So decent. Some seasons better than others. Some seasons he was really good. Some seasons, very accurate pitcher, especially later in life. That was one of his calling cards. Is he didn't walk very many people, period, which gives him an advantage in this situation. He took the mound on Sunday, May 17th, 1998, on Beanie Baby Day, by the way, at the ballpark. Beanie, you're too young for Beanie Babies, aren't you? Like, slightly? You have.
No, I had them.
Yeah, Beanie Babies.
I hate to know what happened to them, but if they're in a landfill somewhere, I am sorry, Earth, because that had to cause some climate change. Just my collection alone.
This is an aside. How did so many people get duped by Beanie Babies? Like, have you seen, there's like this famous clip of this couple that's getting a divorce, and the Beanie Baby collection is brought into the courtroom, and they're like sorting through it in front of a freaking judge. Like, how did we get to the point where we thought they were that valuable of a thing? Oh my gosh. It's like these non-fungible tokens or whatever we're passing around now for like thousands of dollars. It's like, how do we, what? My God.
That's bad.
Anyway, it's Beanie Baby Day. So it is one of, Yankee Stadium fills up pretty well, but it's one of the few true sellouts of a regular season game, just a normal, regular Sunday afternoon that would happen. And so we got a packed crowd. It's 1:36 p.m. It's a great Sunday afternoon against the lowly 2 years away from being slated for contraction Minnesota Twins. So not very good. Allegedly, so remember, this game starts at 1:36. Allegedly, David Wells was out until 5:30 in the morning that night, attending an SNL, Saturday Night Live rap party with Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers. Meyers and Fallon, to his credit, both corroborate the story in one way or another by saying they remember being with him, they remember this party, they remember all this stuff. But there's one problem. The history major in me, I know this is going to catch your attention too. There's one problem with this idea. The last episode of Saturday Night Live that season was May 9th, not May 16th. So if he was attending some kind of after party for the season, he's got something doesn't add up. So there was no episode that night. So we could chalk it up to a bad memory, right? He did hang out with them, but it wasn't a rap party. Could be a joint lie they're all telling to make the situation seem better. Or it just could be misremembering why they were out, right? They were all out together. They had a good time. They saw each other while they were out, decided to just keep partying. But they all corroborate that the 5:30 a.m. thing happened.
Here's my theory. On May 9th, they did hang out at this party until 5:30. On the night prior to the perfect game, they also hung out. Maybe not till 5:30, maybe until 5:30. But they just hung out, and maybe they hung out with the same people. So it's very possible that two stories just got overlapped. Again, stories get exaggerated, purposefully or not, but memory is not good, especially for someone who claims to be inebriated a lot.
Yeah, so in this situation, Wells is going to go on an interview with Bryant Gumbel from HBO's Real Sports, and he says that he pitched the game, this is a quote, with a raging, skull-rattling hangover. So just completely out of it. He also claimed that he had only gotten 1 hour of sleep before the game, which that alone, I'm around the same age he would have been in 1998. And 1 hour of sleep by itself, forget everything else, 1 hour of sleep, I would not be operating anywhere near peak efficiency at that point in time.
No one, even if you train yourself to try and operate on 1 hour of sleep, it never really works. But what confuses me is that if he were out until 5:30, timeline to me is a little weird. So I'm willing to bet that he actually slept a little more than that. Still had a hangover, but why would you wake up at 6:30 for a 1:30 game?
Yeah, unless you like couldn't, I don't know. You hung out at your house awake for a while.
Maybe. I'm just saying.
Maybe.
I'm just.
He had an early morning lift session, so he couldn't miss it.
Yeah.
Oh man, so he was not having a great season. His first 9 starts that year, his ERA was over 5, which is bad. Bad. Like you're just terrible. On this day, I guess this was his get right game, because on this day everything was working. His catcher Jorge Posada said that they didn't speak the whole game. They didn't have a conversation. I'm assuming. I mean, you got to take him at his word that they didn't speak at all. I'm assuming really he means he didn't have to go to the mound to have a conversation. They didn't have to have a strategy talk, because Posada said whatever he put down and wherever he set up is where that's the pitch he was getting, and that's where the ball was going. Now, this may have something to do with the fact that Wells has a skull rattling hangover, and he says he had 1 hour of sleep. He's not really trying to do a lot of thinking. He's just going to nod and throw. But everything was working for him. My favorite quote of this, given the situation, is that Joe Torre said you could just tell from the way he was standing on the mound that he was more focused than usual. It's like, Joe. Joe Torre's right about a lot of things, but more focused than usual may not be the right answer here.
Joe Torre being the manager of the Yankees at the time, yes. And I cannot imagine that was actually the case. Of course, after someone throws a perfect game, you're like, if Joe Torre is just paying attention to anything, again, about the 6th inning, you start realizing that something special is happening, and every eye in the stadium is evaluating everything the pitcher does. Whether Joe Torre was going to be staring at David Wells the whole time or not, he wasn't going to pull him, so he was just going to stare at him. So of course, that mindset, I can see how Joe Torre would later think, "Oh man, yeah, he looked real focused." Like, yeah, well, he just did something that only 23 other people. Well, at the time, it was like he was the 15th one to do it, I think. So he was. It had only happened 14 other times in 100 and something years. So, of course, he was focused, but I don't know. This is what it sounds like to me, a functioning alcoholic.
Oh, yeah. That's got to be the situation.
Like, that's what he should have drank more in his first 9 starts. Maybe he'd have a better ERA.
Maybe he would have been better. Oh man, you can go back and look at this game too. The crowd was eating it up because it's Yankee Stadium and it's full of children and their parents
And Beanie Babies.
and Beanie Babies. So the crowd's eating it up, and for whatever reason, you always hear that everybody's like, you can't talk to the pitcher. As soon as everybody starts realizing that even in a no hitter, as soon as everybody starts realizing things are going on, you always see it, right? It's the picture of the dugout and the pitcher sitting over here, and then there's just all this space, and the other 20, I guess there's guys in the bullpen, so the other 16 of them are just sitting on top of each other in one corner of the dugout. They don't want to talk. That did not happen in this situation, mostly because David Wells did not want to let it happen. He says that he knew what was going on. He knew that everybody else knew what was going on, and he would just go and talk to people because he wasn't going to sit there and be silent for the entirety of the game. I think David Cohn was there cracking jokes with him, trying to lighten the mood too, and it works out. There were a couple, like we said, tight moments. He went to a 3-2 count, so a full count in the 7th inning against Paul Molitor. Paul Molitor, one of the best hitters of his era. So not an easy out. Got the strikeout in that situation. And then in the 8th inning, he needed a backhand stop by Chuck Knobloch. And I literally wrote oof in our notes here because at the time, Chuck Knobloch was still a Gold Glove caliber second baseman, but it would only be a few years before Chuck Knobloch got the yips and was throwing baseballs that hit who's the like loudmouth? Keith Olbermann. It hit Keith Olbermann's mom in the stands one day because he was just so wild. He just got the yips, could not throw the ball from second base to first. From Gold Glover to they had him. He was a quick contact hitting second baseman. The Yankees had to play him at DH because
he couldn't
get it. Couldn't get out of his own head. But at this point, he's still a Gold Glover, so makes a backhand stop in the 8th inning. And the game ends, if you've ever seen this, if you haven't, go take a look at some of the highlights on YouTube. But this is one of the lasting images of Yankees lore, but also baseball lore. This is a thing almost movie-like. So he finishes the perfect game, and they mob him on the mound, and then they throw him up on their shoulders, and they're like walking him off the field. He takes his cap off, is like thrusting it to the crowd. And it's just one of those feel-good moments that you see a lot of times in highlight packages and such. But there you go, the perfect game with the skull-rattling hangover.
Wells is not a small man. So,
not at all.
So the fact that his teammates were elated enough to throw him up into the air onto their shoulders and walk off the field with him, like this is a really important. It is a really important thing, hangover or not. Like it's still an amazing thing. And again, David Wells was probably a slightly better pitcher than Doc Ellis over his career.
Yeah.
But he made his rounds throughout Major League Baseball. His longest stint was with the team that drafted him, the Toronto Blue Jays, in '87. Yeah. And then he played for Detroit, Cincinnati, Baltimore, New York, Toronto, Chicago, New York again, Padres, Boston, Padres, Dodgers. So over a 20-year career, he was a 3-time All-Star, won 2 World Series. So I mean, like he was top of the rotation. But he had an interesting delivery, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, it was kind of unorthodox, a lot of moving parts to it, especially for a guy that was his size to have a lot of moving parts. It's weird, but yeah. We're not going to leave you without a couple of things. We know both of those were really baseball stories, and we know you heard Inebriated Sports, and you were like, you had people in your head, because we did too. Obviously, there's all the stories about Mike Tyson, who was addicted to, I think, just about everything that you can be addicted to. I think it was cocaine. That was the night before the Lennox Lewis fight, the press conference where he said that he wanted to eat everybody's babies and all this stuff. So there's that. There's that. Mike Tyson, obviously. Another baseball drunk story. Wade Boggs apparently was a highly functioning alcoholic. So the story is on a flight from, I think he was playing with Boston at the time. So they were on the way to Seattle. He drank 50 beers on the flight, which, okay, that If we're talking about drinking 50 bottles of water, that's
a lot.
I don't know that you should be doing that, right? But the story is drank 50 beers on the plane. Depending on who you talk to, like it gets to be a tall tale, and supposedly could have drunk near 100 over the course of a day, and still went 3 for 5 in his first game against Seattle. So,
Again, functioning alcoholic.
Several baseball players had to testify in the Pittsburgh drug trials in 1985. I think you know more about that than I do.
This is a little post Doc Ellis time, but in the early 80s, of course, cocaine ravaged the country, but specifically baseball. And there was this huge thing in the Pittsburgh Pirates organization specifically where cocaine was going around like they were passing out bubble gum or sunflower seeds. So ended up a drug dealer from Pittsburgh was continuously invited into their clubhouse and would sell them cocaine, and they would snort before, during, after, all of them, like almost everybody. One of the players, a couple of the players important on that team were Tim Raines and Keith Hernandez. One of the two of them later said that in the early 80s, about 40% of Major League Baseball was regularly using cocaine. Not like we've tried it once, but regularly using cocaine, like before, during, after games. Specifically, Tim Raines kept cocaine in his uniform pocket in vials. He was very notorious for stealing bases, like stole a lot of them. And he always slid head first. And that was because he didn't want to break the vials of cocaine that he had in his back pocket. So very, very interesting thing. I think by the end of it, after the grand jury and everything, the dealer was convicted, and 6 players, don't quote me on that, but multiple of the players from that team were all convicted in some sort.
Yep, but baseball is dirty now, never before. And we can't mention inebriated sports without golf's most famous inebriated person, John Daly.
Man,
who has his own sort of transgressions. That's we're just going to mention him there, but we could do a whole episode on John Daly just smoking and drinking his way down a golf course and writing down an eagle and then a 15 back to back, because you never knew what was going to happen. So there you go. There's a little look at inebriated sports. As always, we'd love to hear this or any other topic you want us to hear us to tackle, just an interesting thing you want us to look and dig deeper into. This one actually suggested in part by our friend Ross, so shout out to him. We'll give you a shout out. You give us a topic, we'll let the world know that you gave us the heads up. So don't be afraid. Any of our social medias, email us and let us know that you want us to look up something, and we'll do it for you. But thanks for listening, and catch up with us in a couple of weeks.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only please, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode. I just like the word inebriated.
Fun.
Sounds so much better than high.
Drunk sports. Oh, man. That's the ESPN The Ocho special.